What if an HOA rent-a-cop pointed a loaded gun at a woman who'd neutralized terrorists in 19 countries? Pure instant regret. He had a badge, but she had 12 years of Delta Force training that kept her alive in the world's deadliest combat zones. Today's story will make your blood boil and have you laughing at the same time as you witness how HOA Queen and her goon squad unknowingly awakened a sleeping giant. I bet many of you watching are dealing with out-of-control HOAs right now. Drop a comment below telling me where you're watching this from. Your office, your bathroom, or maybe sneaking a view during a family gathering. Trust me, you're going to want to stick around for the ending of this one. Before we begin, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you never miss stories like this. Moving to Elmwood Estates seemed like the right decision at the time. After 15 years in the military and another 15 as a civil engineer, I was looking for a quiet place to settle down. My name is Jack Miller, and at 53, I thought I knew what I was getting into when I signed those mortgage papers. The real estate agent conveniently forgot to mention that this pristine neighborhood, with its perfectly manicured lawns, was ruled by one of the most tyrannical homeowners associations in the state. My daughter Emily was supposed to stay with me temporarily while recovering from a knee injury, though I didn't know at the time that her knee injury was a convenient cover story for something else entirely. I was unpacking boxes in my new garage when I received my first HOA violation notice. The envelope was crisp white with a gold-embossed logo. Elmwood Estates, where excellence lives. Inside was a notice informing me that my garbage can was positioned 1 inch too far from the curb, resulting in a $50 fine. I laughed, thinking it was a joke from a neighbor. It wasn't. The next day, another notice arrived, this time about my grass being a 1/4 inch too high, another $50. When the third notice came complaining about my curtains not matching the approved color palette, I decided it was time to meet the people behind these ridiculous rules. The monthly HOA meeting was held in the community center, a building that looked more like a small palace than a meeting space. As I walked in, conversations hushed and eyes turned to me. I spotted her immediately, Patricia Sullivan, HOA president, sitting at the center of a long table like a queen holding court. Her hair was perfectly styled, not a strand out of place, and her expression was one of permanent disapproval. Later, I would learn that Patricia was a twice-divorced former middle manager who had been fired for her dictatorial management style. The HOA was her kingdom now, the only place where she felt in control. "Mr. Miller, so nice of you to join us," she said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "We were just discussing the new landscaping regulations. Perhaps you'd like to review them, considering your difficulties with lawn maintenance." Snickers rippled through the room. I stayed calm, introduced myself politely, and took a seat. For the next hour, I witnessed Patricia and her board, all people who seemed terrified of crossing her, vote on increasingly restrictive rules. The final straw came when they unanimously approved a new regulation. No vehicles could be parked in driveways for more than 2 hours. My house, unlike most in the neighborhood, didn't have a garage. This rule was clearly aimed at me. When the floor opened for questions, I stood up. "I'd like to ask about the financial reports," I said. "The HOA fees are quite substantial. Could you share a breakdown of how that money is being spent?" Patricia's smile vanished. "Our finances are perfectly in order, Mr. Miller. If you don't like our regulations, you're free to sell your home and move elsewhere." Around me, neighbors stared at the floor, no one willing to meet my eyes or support my question. I slowly nodded, my hand tightening into a fist in my pocket, but outwardly maintaining the calm of a soldier accustomed to insults. My eyes swept across the downturned faces in the room, people who had endured this for too long. I stood up, my shoulders slumped as if carrying a heavy burden, but my eyes burned with a simmering flame. "Thank you for the enlightening meeting," I said, each word slow and deliberate. "I'll certainly remember it." As I walked out, I knew I had no choice but to fight back. She wanted war. I would show her what real war looked like. But I had no idea that the real battle would begin when a true warrior arrived at Elmwood Estates. On my way home, I met Charles Winters, a 70-year-old Vietnam veteran who lived 3 doors down from me. His hands trembled slightly as he told me how the HOA had forced him to remove a small memorial flagpole from his yard, one that honored his fallen comrades. $500 a day in fines until I took it down, he whispered, looking over his shoulder to make sure no one was listening. Been here 15 years, and now I can barely afford to stay. I felt my blood boil as he described how Patricia had personally supervised its removal, smirking as Charles fought back tears. Over the next few days, more neighbors quietly approached me with similar stories. Margaret Reynolds, a widow in her 60s, showed me notices demanding she remove the rose garden her late husband had planted, calling it non-compliant vegetation. The Rodriguez family had been fined $2,000 for having relatives stay overnight during Christmas without proper visitor registration. These weren't just petty violations. This was systematic intimidation designed to either extract money or force people to sell their homes at below-market prices. I began documenting everything, using my engineering background to create detailed records. More than once, I spotted Ryan and his security team photographing my house at odd hours. When I confronted them, they claimed they were monitoring potential violations. Their smug confidence told me they believed they were untouchable. I needed help, but I didn't know where to turn. The local authorities seemed uninterested in HOA disputes, calling them civil matters. City officials mysteriously failed to return my calls once I mentioned Elmwood Estates. 3 weeks after that HOA meeting, my daughter Emily came home from what everyone in our family called her overseas consulting job. The truth was much more complex. Emily had served 12 years in the U.S. Army's elite Delta Force, a fact known to very few people. At 32, she had seen more combat than most soldiers twice her age. Her official reason for discharge was a minor knee injury, but I suspected there was more to it. Emily had always been quiet about her work, and I respected that. What I didn't expect was how quickly she would notice the tension in our new neighborhood. "Dad, what's with all these violation notices?" she asked on her second morning, holding a stack of envelopes with the HOA logo. I explained the situation while making us breakfast, trying to downplay it. Emily just listened, her expression unreadable in that way she had developed during her military years. A calm exterior that revealed nothing of her thoughts. "Don't worry about it," I said finally. "It's just petty neighborhood politics." Emily nodded, but I could tell she wasn't convinced. That was my daughter, always observant, always analyzing. What surprised me was how quickly she became involved. It happened the next day. Emily was out for a walk, part of her physical therapy routine for her knee, when she came across an elderly man being harassed by 3 men in matching polo shirts with Elmwood Estates security embroidered on them. I would later learn that the elderly man was Walter Thompson, a 65-year-old retired schoolteacher who lived alone and whose violation was a fence that didn't meet the exact specifications in the HOA guidelines. Walter couldn't afford to replace it, and the daily fines were draining his fixed income. The leader of the security team was Ryan Briggs, a 38-year-old former grocery store security guard who had been fired for excessive force. Patricia had hired him because she needed someone tough to maintain order. Emily approached the scene, not rushing, not hesitating. There was something about her walk that made Ryan's group take notice. Not haste, not fear, but the precision of someone who had walked into the world's most dangerous places and returned. "What are you doing with him?" Emily asked, her voice even, neither high nor low. But something about it made Ryan look directly at her. "HOA business. None of your concern," Ryan snapped, but his voice rose slightly higher than normal. Emily just looked straight into his eyes, silent to the point where you could hear the wind rustling through the leaves. She didn't blink. Her gaze seemed to pierce through to the core of Ryan's being, where he knew he was just a coward, bullying an old man. "You will let Mr. Thompson go home," Emily said slowly. "Right now." Ryan was about to say something, but when Emily took one small step forward, he inexplicably backed away. There was no threat, no dramatic gesture, just her presence, like a jaguar standing still, not needing to growl to signal danger. "Let's go!" Ryan jerked his head at his companions, trying to hide his frustration. "We'll come back later." As they walked away, Walter thanked Emily profusely, explaining the situation with his fence and the mounting fines. Emily helped him home, and by that evening she had gathered enough information about the HOA's practices to confirm my suspicions. Patricia Sullivan was running a sophisticated scheme to extract money from residents through arbitrary fines and inflated maintenance contracts with companies owned by her friends and family. When Patricia showed up at our door the next day, her fake smile was gone. "Mr. Miller, you need to control your daughter. She's interfering with HOA business and intimidating our security staff." I tried to explain that Emily had merely helped an elderly neighbor who was being harassed, but Patricia wasn't interested in explanations. "There will be serious consequences if this continues," she threatened before storming off. That night, Emily and I sat down at the kitchen table with all the information we had gathered. "Dad, this isn't just annoying bureaucracy," Emily said, spreading out documents she had collected from sympathetic neighbors. "They're embezzling HOA funds, awarding contracts to Patricia's brother's maintenance company at 3 times the market rate, and using intimidation to keep everyone quiet. What we didn't know was that Patricia had installed unauthorized surveillance cameras throughout the neighborhood. As we met secretly with other frustrated residents in Walter's living room the following week, gathering more evidence and testimonies, Patricia was watching. "I want the Miller family to learn what happens when people oppose me," she told Ryan, reviewing the footage of our meeting, especially when the father is away on his business trip. The stage was set for a confrontation that would change everything, an encounter that would prove to be Patricia's biggest mistake. 2 days later, I had to leave town for a short business trip. Normally, I wouldn't have worried about leaving Emily alone. She was, after all, someone who had survived multiple tours in war zones. But something about Patricia's threat lingered in my mind. "Are you sure you'll be okay?" I asked Emily as I packed my overnight bag. She just gave me that small smile that always reassured me. "Dad, I've handled insurgents in Kandahar. I think I can handle a power-hungry HOA president and her mall cops." I laughed, but still felt uneasy as I drove away. If only I had known what would happen that night. Emily was reviewing some job applications on her laptop. She was considering opening a self-defense training center when a loud, aggressive knock came at our front door. Through the peephole, she saw Ryan Briggs and 2 other men in the HOA security polos. Ryan's face was flushed with anger or alcohol, possibly both. "Open up. HOA inspection." Emily opened the door but blocked the entrance. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" she asked calmly. Ryan thrust a paper toward her. "We've received reports of an unauthorized resident. According to HOA bylaws, all residents must be registered and approved. You're not on the list." Emily looked at the paper. It was a hastily printed regulation that she was certain hadn't existed the day before. "I'm Mr. Miller's daughter, staying temporarily while recovering from an injury. There's nothing in the HOA agreement that requires registration for family visits." Ryan's face reddened further. "New emergency regulation. We need to inspect the premises and verify your identity." Emily stood her ground. "You're not coming in without a warrant. This is private property." She had started recording the conversation on her phone, sliding it partially out of her pocket. Ryan tried to push past her, but Emily didn't budge. Her balanced stance was something she had perfected through years of combat training. "Get out of the way," Ryan shouted, growing increasingly frustrated. We have the authority to enter any property in Elmwood Estates. Emily remained calm. That's not true, and you know it. The HOA agreement doesn't supersede constitutional rights against unlawful search and seizure. I suggest you leave now. That's when Ryan made his fatal mistake. Frustrated and humiliated, he reached under his polo shirt and pulled out a handgun. Get out of our neighborhood, Oregon. I'll shoot. The gun had barely appeared in Ryan's hand when everything happened in a blur. Emily didn't scream or dodge. Instead, her body became sharp as a blade. With a slight twist, her hand reached out at a speed impossible to track, and suddenly, the gun was in her hand. Ryan was face down on the wooden porch, his arm locked behind his back. Emily felt Ryan's panicked heartbeat through his wrist, his rapid breathing, the trembling of his body. Cold sweat broke out on the back of his neck. This was the first time Ryan had truly faced what he had been pretending to possess. Real power. Don't hurt me, Ryan stammered, his voice nothing like that of the man who had threatened to shoot someone seconds ago. Emily held him in that position, not using much strength, but with such precision that Ryan couldn't move an inch. Never point a gun at someone, she said quietly, unless you're prepared to face what comes after. Ryan's two companions, Scott and Damon, turned and ran when they saw how quickly their leader had been neutralized. Emily kept Ryan pinned with one hand while calling the police with the other. When the officers arrived, they discovered that Ryan's gun was unregistered, and he had an outstanding warrant for assault from a previous job. As they took him away in handcuffs, I was still blissfully unaware on my business trip, thinking Emily was having a quiet evening at home. I returned the next day to find Emily calmly drinking tea on our front porch. "How was your trip?" she asked as if nothing had happened. It took a few minutes of conversation before she casually mentioned, "By the way, one of the HOA security guys pulled a gun on me last night. He's in jail now." I nearly spilled my coffee as she recounted the story. Part of me was furious that this had happened, but another part, the part that had served with some of America's finest soldiers, felt an odd sense of pride. My daughter had handled the situation with the composure and skill that marked a true professional. But as Emily finished her story, she added a warning. "This isn't over, Dad. Patricia has friends in local law enforcement. Ryan's arrest will disappear from the records, and they'll come after us even harder now." She was right. We had no idea that Patricia Sullivan had connections that ran deeper than we imagined, or that her capacity for revenge would target every aspect of our lives. The gun incident was just the beginning of a systematic attack that would force us to use every skill and resource we had. But they had chosen the wrong family to mess with. The retaliation began almost immediately. 3 days after Ryan's arrest, notices started appearing on neighbors' doors, warning about the dangerous new residence on Maple Drive. The flyers described us as violent, unstable, and a threat to community safety. Patricia had launched a full-scale character assassination campaign. Neighbors who had been friendly now crossed the street to avoid us. Invitations to community events were rescinded. Even the local coffee shop owner, who had been chatting amicably with me just days earlier, suddenly couldn't meet my eyes when I came in for my usual order. The legal harassment intensified as well. Our HOA fees were mysteriously tripled, with a special assessment for additional security measures necessitated by recent violent incidents. When I tried to contest this at the next HOA meeting, I was informed that I had been banned from attending due to safety concerns. Meanwhile, Patricia's cousin, Officer Steve Williams, ensured that Ryan's arrest record was buried and the charges reduced to a minor citation for disturbing the peace. The gun, the unregistered gun that had been pointed at my daughter's face, was never mentioned in the final police report. The most devastating blow came a week later. I was sitting in my car, staring at an email from my company. The termination notice glowed on my phone screen. The sunset cast long red streaks across the dashboard, illuminating my weathered face with its harsh light. The old silver wedding ring on my finger caught the weak light, a reminder of my late wife, my daughter being smeared across the community. And now my job was gone too. I looked out the window toward the house I had bought with such hope. Now a battlefield. I said nothing, just gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. They think they've taken everything, I whispered to myself. But they've forgotten one thing. They've left me nothing more to lose. The email cited community disturbances affecting the company's reputation as the reason for my termination. I later learned that Patricia's brother, Greg Sullivan, golfed regularly with my company's executive vice president. This wasn't just neighborhood politics anymore. This was a coordinated attack on our livelihood and reputation. That night, Emily found me at the kitchen table surrounded by bills and mortgage statements. "They're trying to force us out, Dad," she said, taking a seat across from me. "They want us to sell and leave." I nodded grimly. "I know, and they might succeed." For the first time since she'd come home, I saw Emily's composure crack slightly. "No," she said firmly. "That's not happening. We're not just going to defend ourselves anymore. We're going to fight back." That's when our strategy shifted. Emily contacted an old teammate from her Delta Force days, James Cooper, who now worked as an investigative journalist. Together, they began digging deeper into Patricia's network and finances. What they uncovered was far bigger than we had imagined. Patricia wasn't just bullying our neighborhood. She was running similar schemes in 5 other HOA communities across the state, using intimidation and connections to extract money from residents and funnel it through her brother's various shell companies. The entire operation hinged on residents being too afraid or too isolated to stand up to her. Meanwhile, I reached out to an old Army buddy who now worked for the Internal Revenue Service. Without revealing our personal stake, I asked some hypothetical questions about HOA financial reporting requirements and the penalties for misrepresentation. His answers were enlightening. That same week, Walter Thompson knocked on our door late one evening. He looked nervous, constantly glancing over his shoulder. "I'm not the only one," he whispered as we invited him in. "There are others, many others, who've been victims of Patricia's schemes. They're afraid to come forward, but—" He placed a folder on our table. "Here are copies of HOA financial documents from the last 5 years. My late wife was an accountant. She kept these because she said something wasn't right about the numbers. What Walter brought us was more valuable than gold. The documents revealed a complex web of financial malfeasance that extended far beyond simple HOA bullying. Patricia had been skimming at least 30% off the top of every HOA fee, funneling the money through a landscaping company supposedly owned by her cousin, but actually registered in her name. The community's emergency fund, containing over $300,000 in residents' money, had been invested in her brother's failing real estate ventures. Most damning of all, the special assessments for infrastructure improvements had yielded no actual repairs. Instead, they paid for Patricia's vacation home in Florida. Emily examined every page with the methodical precision she developed during intelligence operations in foreign countries. "This isn't just fraud, Dad," she said, pointing to a series of suspicious transactions. "This is money laundering. She's using the HOA as a front to clean money from other illegal activities." Walter confirmed our suspicions when he mentioned rumors that Patricia's brother was involved in land rezoning schemes with certain corrupt city officials. The deeper we dug, the more we realized that Elmwood Estates was just one piece of a much larger criminal enterprise. We decided to approach other residents carefully, starting with Margaret Reynolds, whose rose garden had been targeted. We met at a diner 20 miles away to avoid scrutiny. Margaret brought 3 other homeowners, all elderly, all victims of Patricia's predatory fines. Their stories painted a consistent pattern. Those who couldn't pay were forced to sell to mysterious investors who always offered well below market value. The property would then be quickly flipped for significant profit. My neighbor Harold sold for $150,000 less than market value after they fined him out of existence, Margaret explained. The very next week, Patricia's brother listed it for sale at full price. The most shocking revelation came from 82-year-old Frank Collins, who arrived late to our meeting. His hands shook as he placed a small recording device on the table. "I was on the board 3 years ago," he explained, "before my wife got sick, and I couldn't attend anymore." Patricia didn't know I recorded the executive sessions. He pressed play, and Patricia's voice filled our booth. "I don't care if they can't pay. That's the point. We keep squeezing until they have no choice but to sell to Greg's company. Then we all get our cut. The old and poor need to move somewhere else anyway. They're bringing down our property values." As we examined the documents, a pattern emerged. Large sums were regularly transferred to maintenance companies that, upon further investigation, were all owned by shell corporations tracing back to Greg Sullivan. Even more disturbing, we found evidence that Patricia was planning to sell the community's common areas, including the playground and the small lake, to a development company owned by her brother. The sale would net them millions while destroying the character and value of the neighborhood. The HOA board members were either complicit or, like Megan Taylor, being blackmailed to keep quiet about their own financial indiscretions. Emily and I looked at each other across the table spread with evidence of corruption. "We have a choice," I said. "We can try to sell the house and cut our losses, or—" Emily finished my thought. "Or we can take them down, not just for us, but for everyone they victimized." There was no real choice to be made. We were soldiers, both of us, in different ways. And soldiers don't abandon people who can't defend themselves. "We're not just fighting for our home anymore," Emily said. "We're fighting for justice." What Patricia Sullivan didn't realize was that she had unwittingly awakened something far more dangerous than a disgruntled homeowner. She had provoked a strategist with special operations training and a father with nothing left to lose. The hunters were about to become the hunted. The next 3 weeks were a masterclass in strategic intelligence gathering. Emily used skills honed in counterterrorism operations to legally place recording devices in public areas of the community center. Each night, she would retrieve them and analyze hours of conversations, building a comprehensive map of Patricia's network and operations. Meanwhile, I worked with my IRS contact to understand exactly what financial crimes were being committed and what evidence would be needed for prosecution. We were careful, methodical, and patient, qualities that had kept us alive in far more dangerous situations than suburban warfare. Our first breakthrough came when Emily managed to access the community center office during daylight hours. As a resident, she had every right to review HOA documents during business hours. While the office manager, Amanda Pierce, was distracted by a phone call Emily's friend had conveniently placed, my daughter photographed financial records, meeting minutes, and correspondence that revealed the full scope of Patricia's schemes. Amanda later approached us privately, confessing she had known about the corruption but feared losing her job if she spoke up. With our assurance of protection, she became our inside source, alerting us to upcoming moves by Patricia and her associates. Through Amanda, we learned of an emergency meeting scheduled for the following weekend. Patricia planned to rush through approval for selling the community's common areas to her brother's development company, Silver Ridge Enterprises. The sale would happen quickly before residents could organize any opposition. The meeting agenda carefully disguised the true purpose behind vague language about optimizing community assets and future enhancement strategies. We needed to expose the truth, but we had to be smart about it. A frontal assault would fail against Patricia's entrenched position. Emily installed a hidden camera in the community center's main meeting room, legally placed in a public space. We coordinated with James to ensure a reporter and photographer from the local newspaper would be present at the meeting, ostensibly covering a human interest story about community governance. Agent Samantha Reynolds, Emily's former teammate, now with the FBI's Public Corruption Unit, was briefed on the situation and agreed to have agents standing by. All the pieces were in place for Patricia's public exposure. The night of the meeting arrived. Emily and I sat at the back of the room, ignored by most residents who had been conditioned to avoid us. Patricia stood at the podium, confidently moving through the agenda items, unaware that her every word was being recorded from multiple angles. When she reached the item about the land sale, her language was deliberately obtuse, talking about unlocking asset potential, rather than explicitly stating that she was selling the community park where children played every day. The board members nodded along, either complicit or cowed into submission. After the vague public presentation, Patricia called for an immediate vote. That's when I raised my hand. "Before we vote," I said, standing up, "could you explain exactly what properties are included in this asset optimization and what the community will receive in return?" Patricia's smile froze. "Mr. Miller, as I've explained, this is a complex financial arrangement that will benefit everyone in the long run. The details are available in the community office during business hours," I persisted. "But we're voting tonight. Shouldn't the residents know that you're selling the park, the lake, and the community center to Silver Ridge Enterprises for development into commercial properties?" A murmur ran through the crowd. Patricia's face flushed. "That's a gross mischaracterization." Emily stood up beside me. "Is it? Because we have copies of the sale agreement right here." She began distributing documents to shocked residents, copies of the contract Patricia had tried to hide. As confusion and anger spread through the room, Patricia attempted to regain control. "This meeting is adjourned. Security, remove the Millers immediately." But Ryan's replacement security guard seemed reluctant to intervene, especially with so many witnesses present. Patricia switched tactics. "What you're seeing is a draft proposal, nothing more. And frankly, the financial details of HOA management are beyond the understanding of most residents. That's why you elected a board to handle these matters." She gestured to her board members, who shifted uncomfortably. That's when Greg Sullivan made a crucial mistake. Frustrated by the derailing of their plans, he stood up and said loudly, "Just take the vote. These people are too stupid to understand real estate values anyway. We're doing them a favor by managing their assets." The room fell silent at this naked contempt. In that moment of shocked silence, the back doors opened. FBI agents entered, followed by the newspaper photographers whose cameras began flashing like lightning in the dim community center. Agent Reynolds approached the podium where Patricia stood frozen. "Patricia Sullivan, we have a warrant to seize HOA financial records and communications regarding the proposed property sale." More camera flashes captured Patricia's expression, changing from confidence to shock. Her face drained from angry red to ghostly white in an instant as she clutched the podium for support. The cameras didn't stop flashing, documenting the collapse of the HOA queen. "This is ridiculous. You have no jurisdiction here," Patricia sputtered. But her voice had lost its authoritative edge. As the FBI began collecting documents and computer equipment, I watched residents who had been intimidated for years finally finding their voices, approaching agents with their own stories of abuse and fraud. Walter Thompson stood tall as he handed over his folder of financial evidence. The system of fear that Patricia had carefully built was collapsing all around her. As she was escorted from the building, not under arrest, but clearly under investigation, she locked eyes with me. "This isn't over, Miller," she hissed. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." I just smiled slightly. "Actually, Patricia, I think you're the one who never knew who you were dealing with. We thought we had won, but that was only the opening act of the battle. When cornered, a predator becomes even more dangerous." The aftermath of the HOA meeting was immediate and chaotic. The local newspaper ran a front-page story about the FBI investigation into the Elmwood Estates HOA, complete with photos of Patricia's shocked face as agents seized records. Residents who had shunned us were now knocking on our door, sharing their own experiences and apologizing for believing the rumors. For a moment, It seemed like justice would prevail swiftly. We were wrong. Patricia Sullivan had spent years building a network of influence, and she wasn't going down without using every connection at her disposal. Within 48 hours, Patricia was released pending investigation. Her attorney, Robert Wilson, held a press conference on the steps of City Hall, portraying her as a victim of malicious slander by disgruntled residents with personal vendettas. Through some legal maneuvering that reeked of backroom deals, Patricia was temporarily reinstated as HOA president. While the investigation proceeded, Greg Sullivan leveraged his political connections to pressure the local FBI office, resulting in the case being temporarily downgraded in priority. Meanwhile, my former employer refused to reconsider my termination, citing ongoing community disputes as a liability risk. The financial strain was becoming unbearable. With no income, mounting legal fees, and the HOA suddenly finding urgent maintenance needs that required special assessments on our property, our savings were dwindling rapidly. Emily's job prospects were also affected as potential employers received anonymous calls questioning her stability and background. It was a comprehensive attack on every aspect of our lives, designed to force us to give up and move away. Patricia had made it clear she would rather destroy us than face accountability. The situation became even more dire when Emily received a disturbing phone call from an unlisted number. "We have information about what really happened in Afghanistan," a male voice said before hanging up. That evening, I found Emily sitting alone on the back porch, staring into the distance. For the first time since her return, I saw her hand trembling slightly as she held her coffee mug. "Dad," she said quietly, "there's something I never told you about Afghanistan." Her voice was so soft I could barely hear it. And then, for the first time in many years, I saw tears rolling down the cheeks of my strong, composed daughter. "There was an incident," she began. As Emily told her story, I realized how much pain she had been carrying alone. During her final deployment, her unit had been involved in an operation that went wrong. Faulty intelligence had led them to a location containing civilians, not the insurgent cell they expected. In the chaos that followed, civilians were injured. Emily had risked her own life to evacuate the wounded, disobeying direct orders to retreat in order to save a family trapped in the crossfire. The official report had been sanitized, focusing on enemy action rather than the intelligence failure. Emily had received accommodation for her rescue efforts, but she carried the guilt of those injuries with her every day. "They're threatening to twist the story," Emily explained. "Make it sound like I was responsible for civilian casualties rather than the person who tried to save them." I reached across the table and took her hand, feeling a father's helpless rage at those who would exploit my child's pain. "We'll figure this out," I promised, though I had no idea how. What I did know was that Patricia had just crossed a line that made our neighborhood dispute seem trivial by comparison. She had made it deeply personal. The next morning, a local news website published a vague but damaging story about questions surrounding the military record of a former soldier now involved in the Elmwood Estates controversy. No names were used, but the implication was clear. Neighbors who had just begun to trust us started keeping their distance again. Emily, who had never flinched under enemy fire, seemed to withdraw into herself, the weight of her past and present colliding in an impossible burden. Watching my daughter suffer broke something inside me. I had always taught her to fight honorably, to stand up for what was right. Now I questioned whether I had led her into a battle that would only cause her more pain. That's when Claire Miller, my older daughter and Emily's sister, arrived from New York. As a corporate attorney, Claire brought both legal expertise and a fresh perspective to our situation. "You're fighting this all wrong," she told us after reviewing everything that had happened. "You're playing defense, responding to each attack. It's time to take control of the narrative." With Claire's help, we began to understand the legal vulnerabilities in Patricia's position. Her first major contribution was discovering that Robert Wilson, Patricia's attorney, was not actually licensed to practice law in our state, a fact that would prove crucial in the coming weeks. The tide began to turn again when Maria Rodriguez, the local reporter who had been covering the story, published an in-depth investigation into Patricia's network of HOA schemes across the state. Her article featured testimonials from residents in 5 different communities, all describing the same patterns of intimidation and financial misconduct. The story went viral, attracting attention from larger media outlets and putting pressure on local officials who had been looking the other way. Residents from other HOA communities began contacting us, forming an informal coalition of Patricia's victims. We were no longer alone in our fight. Just as momentum seemed to be shifting in our favor again, Patricia played what she thought was her trump card. At a hastily arranged press conference, she announced she would be releasing definitive evidence of misconduct by Emily during her military service, claiming it would reveal the true character of those attacking her reputation. The press conference was scheduled for the following morning. As we watched the announcement on the local news, I saw Emily's face go pale. "They're really going to do it," she whispered. "They're going to take the worst day of my life and use it to protect their corruption." I had never felt more helpless as a father than in that moment. But sometimes, when the situation seems most hopeless, unexpected allies emerge. That evening, our doorbell rang. Standing on our porch was Captain James Wilson, Emily's former commanding officer, and beside him, a man I didn't recognize, who introduced himself as Amir Kazemi, a former interpreter who had worked with Emily's unit in Afghanistan. They had seen the news and understood immediately what was happening. "I'm not letting them destroy your reputation with lies," Captain Wilson told Emily. "It's time for the real story to be told." For the first time in weeks, I saw hope return to my daughter's eyes. The morning of Patricia's press conference dawned with a sense of impending collision. 2 narratives were about to clash in public, with my daughter's reputation and our future in the balance. Emily, Captain Wilson, and Amir prepared their own statements, ready to counter whatever distortion Patricia planned to release. Claire had arranged for supportive media coverage, ensuring that Emily's side would be heard. We were as prepared as we could be for a public battle over my daughter's most painful memories. As we drove to the Civic Center where the press conference would be held, Emily was unusually quiet. "Are you sure you want to do this?" I asked her. She looked at me with determination in her eyes. "Dad, running from bullies never works." "You taught me that." I nodded, throat tight with emotion. No parent wants to see their child in pain, but I couldn't have been prouder of her courage. When we arrived, the parking lot was packed with news vans, and a crowd had gathered in anticipation of the promised revelations. Patricia's character assassination was about to be a public spectacle. We took our seats near the back, waiting for Patricia to make her entrance. 10 minutes passed beyond the scheduled start time, then 20. Murmurs spread through the crowd as reporters checked their phones and looked questioningly at each other. Finally, a flustered Robert Wilson appeared on stage alone. "Miss Sullivan has been unavoidably detained," he announced awkwardly. "The press conference is postponed indefinitely." A barrage of questions erupted from the assembled journalists, but Wilson quickly retreated from the podium without providing any explanation. As the confused crowd dispersed, Emily's phone rang. It was Agent Reynolds. "You might want to turn on Channel 4, she said cryptically. We huddled around a nearby cafe television with several reporters watching breaking news unfold. The camera showed Patricia Sullivan at the international airport being escorted by men in dark suits. The caption read, "HOA President detained by federal authorities." But it wasn't FBI agents leading her away. The reporters gasped when they saw the insignia on the agents' jackets. Internal Revenue Service, Criminal Investigation Division. Rapid footsteps on the marble floor of the airport. Patricia turned around, her suitcase still clutched in her hand. Before her, a man in a dark suit slowly pulled out his badge, the metal reflecting the airport lights like a pronouncement of doom. "Internal Revenue Service. Miss Patricia Sullivan, you're under arrest." His voice echoed like a funeral bell. Patricia staggered, nearly collapsing, not from shock, but from the realization that she had completely lost. Her eyes were vacant, empty, as if her entire world had just collapsed in an instant. The reporter explained that Patricia was being arrested for tax evasion, specifically for failing to report over $2 million in income diverted from various HOA funds over the past 6 years. The report cut to a federal prosecutor explaining that tax evasion charges carried much heavier penalties than the fraud charges Patricia had been fighting, up to 20 years in federal prison. I felt Emily's hand grip my arm as the realization hit us both. This wasn't the result of our recent evidence gathering or the FBI investigation. This was something else entirely. Back home that evening, as we tried to process this unexpected turn of events, I finally confessed to Emily. "Remember my old Army buddy who works for the IRS? I sent him all our financial evidence 6 months ago, when we first started getting those ridiculous violation notices." Emily's eyes widened. 6 months ago? Before Ryan pulled a gun on me? Before all of this escalated? I nodded. I had a feeling from the beginning that something wasn't right about the HOA finances, so I hedged my bets. A slow smile spread across Emily's face, the first genuine smile I'd seen in weeks. "Dad, you sneaky old soldier." "We were taught the same thing in the military," I explained. "Never rely on a single plan of attack. The strongest strategy is the one your opponent doesn't see coming." While Patricia had been focused on intimidating us, fighting the FBI investigation, and attacking Emily's reputation, the IRS had been quietly building a federal tax evasion case that would be nearly impossible to defend against. The evidence of financial fraud we had gathered for the FBI had also been crucial for the IRS investigation. But the tax charges were more straightforward to prosecute and carried heavier penalties. The following weeks brought a cascade of changes to Elmwood Estates. Greg Sullivan was arrested attempting to leave the country, charged with conspiracy and bribery of public officials. Robert Wilson was disbarred for practicing without a proper license. The HOA board was dissolved and reconstituted through a democratic election, with Walter Thompson, now standing tall and confident, elected as the new president. His first act was to eliminate most of the petty regulations Patricia had put in place and reduce HOA fees to cover only necessary maintenance. Former employer called with an apology and a job offer at a higher position, having learned how they had been manipulated by Greg's influence. Emily decided to stay in the community, opening her self-defense training center with a special program for seniors and women, many of whom had been intimidated by Patricia's regime. The center quickly became a community gathering place, helping to heal the divisions Patricia had fostered for so long. The park and community spaces that Patricia had tried to sell were preserved, with improvements funded by recovered HOA funds. 6 months later, Emily and I sat on our front porch swing, watching neighborhood children playing in the street, something that had been prohibited under Patricia's rules. "You know," Emily said, sipping her lemonade, "in some ways, this battle was more dangerous than my tour in Kabul." I chuckled. "How do you figure that?" She looked thoughtful. "In combat, you know who the enemy is. Here, the enemy was hiding behind rules and respectability, using the system against us." I nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. "But there's one thing Patricia never understood," I said. Emily raised an eyebrow. "What's that, Dad?" I smiled, watching the sunset paint our neighborhood in warm, golden light. "When you threaten the daughter of an old soldier, and that daughter happens to be a Delta Force operator, you haven't just made a mistake. You've signed the death warrant for your career and reputation." Emily laughed, a sound I had missed during our darkest days. On the television visible through our front window, a news ticker announced Patricia Sullivan's 15-year federal prison sentence for tax evasion and fraud. As twilight settled over Elmwood Estates, Nasha neighbors waved as they walked past our house, the same neighbors who had once crossed the street to avoid us. Children played freely on lawns that were no longer measured by rulers. Walter stopped by to discuss plans for the community garden that would replace Patricia's ostentatious HOA signage. Our home was finally what we had hoped for when I signed those mortgage papers. Not perfect, but ours. In a community where people looked out for each other instead of policing each other's lives. We didn't just win our house back, Emily said softly. We freed an entire neighborhood. I put my arm around my daughter's shoulders, immensely proud of the woman she had become. That's what real soldiers do, I replied. We protect those who can't protect themselves. In the end, Patricia's reign of terror had been undone not by violence or intimidation, her own tactics, but by something more powerful, the quiet courage of ordinary people standing together for what was right. And perhaps by one old soldier who knew that the best battle plan is the one your enemy never sees coming.